Hey, altruistic well-wishers and constructive critics, I presume that you and your beloved ones are in a fine fettle. It is social act and good-hearted teacher Professor Suresh back with absolute delight for my 104th video on Anvil of Publication on YouTube today, November 2020 Tuesday. I have selected sleep deprivation, prime causes and effects for presentation today. Is a naturally recurring state of mind and body characterized by altered consciousness, relatively inhibited sensory activity, reduced muscle activity, and inhibition of nearly all voluntary muscles during rapid eye movement, sleep, and reduced interactions with surroundings. It is distinguished from wakefulness by a decreased ability to react to stimuli, but more reactive than a coma or disorders of consciousness, with the sleep displaying very different and active brain patterns. Sleep occurs in repeating periods in disorders of consciousness, with the sleep displaying very different and active brain patterns. Sleep occurs in repeating periods in which the body alternates between two distinct modes, the rapid eye movement sleep and non-rapid eye movement sleep, REM. Although REM stands for rapid eye movement, this mode of sleep may has many other aspects, including virtual paralysis of the body. A well-known feature of sleep is a dream, an experience typically recounted in narrative form, which resembles waking life while in progress, which usually can later be distinguished as fantasy. During sleep, most of the body systems are in an anabolic state, helping to restore the immune, nervous, skeletal, and muscular systems. These are vital processes that maintain mood, memory, and cognitive function and play a large role in the function of the endocrine and immune systems. The internal circadian clock promotes sleep daily at night. The diverse purposes and mechanisms of sleep are the subject of substantial ongoing research. Sleep is a highly conserved behavior across animal evolution. Humans may suffer from various sleep disorders, including insomnia, such as insomnia, hypersomnia, narcolepsy, and sleep apnea. Parasomnias, such as sleepwalking and REM sleep behavior disorder, bruxism, and circadian rhythm sleep disorders. The use of artificial light has substantially altered humanity's sleep patterns. The most pronounced physiological changes in sleep occur in the brain. The brain uses significantly less energy during sleep than it does when awake, especially during non-REM sleep. In areas with reduced activity, the brain restores its supply adenosine triphosphate (ATP), the molecule used for short-term storage and transport of energy. In quiet waking, the brain is responsible for 20% of the body's energy use, thus its reduction has a noticeable effect on overall energy consumption. Sleep increases the sensory threshold. In other words, sleeping persons perceive fewer stimuli but can generally still respond to loud noises and other salient sensory events. During slow wave sleep, humans secrete bursts of growth hormone. All sleep, even during the day, is associated with secretion of prolactin. Key physiological methods for monitoring and measuring changes during sleep include electroencephalography (EEG) or brain waves, electrooculography (EOG) of eye movements, electromyography (EMG) of skeletal muscle activity. Simultaneous collection of these measurements is called polysomnography and can be performed in a specialized sleep laboratory. Sleep researchers have also used simplified electrocardiography (EKG) for cardiac activity and actigraphy for motor movements. Sleep is divided into two broad types: non-rapid eye movement, non-REM or NREM sleep, and rapid eye movement, REM sleep. Non-REM and REM sleep are so different that physiologists identify them as distinct behavioral states. Non-REM sleep occurs first, and after a transitional period is called slow wave sleep or deep sleep. During this phase, body temperature and heart rate fall, and the brain uses less energy. REM sleep, aka also known as paradoxical sleep, represents a smaller portion of total sleep time. It is a main occasion for dreams or nightmares and is associated with the desynchronized and fast brain waves, eye movements, loss of muscle tone, and suspension of homeostasis. The sleep cycle of alternate non-REM and REM sleep takes an average of 90 minutes, occurring 4 to 6 times in a good night's sleep. The American Academy of Sleep Medicine (AASM) divides NREM into 3 stages: N1, N2, and N3, the last of which is also called the delta sleep. or slow wave sleep. The whole period normally proceeds in the order N1, N2, N3, N2, then REM. REM sleep occurs as a person returns to stage 2 or 1 from deep sleep. There is a greater amount of deep sleep, stage N3, early in the night, while the proportion of REM sleep increases in the 2 cycles just before natural awakening. Awakening can mean the end of sleep or simply a moment to survey the environment and readjust body position before falling back asleep. Sleepers typically awaken soon after the end of a REM phase or sometimes the middle of REM. Internal circadian indicators, along with the successful reduction of homeostatic sleep need, typically being bring about awakening at the end of the sleep cycle. Awakening involves heightened electrical activation in the brain, beginning with the thalamus and spreading throughout the cortex. During a night sleep, a small amount of time is usually spent in a waking state. As measured by EEG, young females are awake for 0 to 1% of the larger sleeping period. Young males are awake 0 to 2%. In adults, wakefulness increases, especially in later cycles. One study found 3% awake time in the first 90-minute sleep cycle, 8% of the in the second, 10% in the third, 12% in the fourth, and 13 to 14% in the fifth. Most of the awake time occurred shortly after REM sleep. Nowadays, many humans wake up with an alarm clock that is really not necessary. However, people can also reliably wake themselves up at a specific time with no need for an alarm. Many sleep quite differently on work days versus days off, a pattern which can lead to chronic circadian desynchronization. Many people regularly look at television and other screens before going to bed, a factor which may exacerbate disruption of the circadian rhythm. Scientific studies on sleep have shown that sleep stage at awakening is an important factor in amplifying sleep inertia. Sleep timing is controlled by the circadian clock, process C. Sleep-wake homeostasis, process S, and to some extent by the individual wake. Sleep timing depends greatly on hormonal signals from the circadian clock, or process C, a complex neurochemical system which uses signals from an organism's environment to recreate an internal day-night rhythm. Process C counteracts the homeostatic drive for sleep during the day in diurnal animals and augments it at night. The suprachiasmatic nucleus, SEN, a brain area directly above the optic chiasm, is presently considered the most important nexus for this process. However, secondary clock systems have been found throughout the body. An organism whose circadian clock exhibits a greater rhythm corresponding to outside signals is said to be entrained. An entrained rhythm persists even if the outside signals suddenly disappear. If the entrained human is isolated in a bunker with constant light or darkness, he or she will continue to experience rhythmic increases and decreases of body temperature and melatonin on a period that slightly exceeds 24 hours. Scientists refer to such conditions as free running of the circadian rhythm. The natural conditions, light signals regularly adjust this period downward so that it corresponds better with the exact 24 hours of an Earth day. The circadian clock exerts constant influence of the body, affecting sinusoidal oscillation of body temperature between roughly 36.2 degrees Celsius and 37.2 degrees Celsius. The SCN itself shows conspicuous oscillation activity which intensifies during subjective day. That is part of the rhythm corresponding with the daytime weather accurately or not and drops to almost nothing during subjective night. The circadian pacemaker in the SCN has a direct neural connection to the pineal gland, which releases hormone melatonin at night. The melatonin is sleep inducer. Cortisol levels typically rise throughout the night, peak in the awakening hours and diminish during the day. Circadian prolactin secretion begins in the late afternoon, especially in women, and is subsequently augmented by sleep-induced secretion. Peak in the middle of the night. Circadian rhythm exerts an influence on the nighttime secretion of growth hormone. The circadian rhythm influences the ideal timing of a restorative sleep episode. Sleepiness increases during the night. REM sleep occurs more during day, body temperature minimum within the circadian cycle, whereas slow wave sleep can occur more independently of circadian time. The internal circadian clock is profoundly influenced by changes in light since these are its main clues about what time it is. Exposure to even small amounts of light during the night can suppress melatonin secretion increased body temperatures and wakefulness. Short pulses of light at the right amount in the circadian cycle can significantly reset the internal clock. Blue light in particular exerts the strongest effect, leading to concerns that electronic media used before bedtime may interfere with sleep. More people Modern humans often find themselves desynchronized from the internal circadian clock due to the requirement of work, especially night shifts, long distance travel, and the influence of universal indoor lighting. Even if they sleep dead or feel sleepy, people can have difficulty staying asleep at the peak of the circadian cycle. Conversely, they can have difficulty waking up in the trough of the cycle. A healthy young diet entrained in the sun will during most of the year fall asleep a few hours after sunset, experience body temperature a minimum of at 6 a.m. and wake up a few hours after sunrise. Generally speaking, the longer an organism is awake, the more it feels the need to sleep. Sleep debt. This driver of sleep excuse me, is referred to as process S. The balance between sleeping and waking is regulated by a process called homeostasis. Induced or perceived lack of sleep is called sleep deprivation. Process S is driven by the depletion of glycogen and accumulation of adenosine in the forebrain. This inhibits a ventrolateral preoptic nucleus, allowing for inhibition of the ascending reticular activating system. Sleep deprivation tends to cause lower brain waves in the frontal cortex, shortened attention span, higher anxiety, impaired memory, and grouchy mood. Conversely, a well-rested organism tends to have improved memory and mood. Neurophysiological and functional imaging studies have demonstrated the frontal regions of the brain are particularly responsive to homeostatic sleep pressure. There is disagreement on how much sleep debt is possible to accumulate and whether sleep debt is accumulated against an individual's average sleep or some other benchmark. It is also unclear whether the prevalence of sleep debt among adults has changed appreciably in the industrialized world in recent decades. Sleep debt thus shows an evidence of being cumulative. Subjectively, however, humans seem to reach maximum sleepiness after 30 hours of waking up. It is likely that in Western societies, people are sleeping less than they previously have. One neurochemical indicator of sleep debt is adenosine, a neurotransmitter that inhibits many of the bodily processes associated with wakefulness. Adenosine levels increase in the cortex and basal forebrain during prolonged wakefulness and decrease during the sleep recovery period, potentially acting as homeostatic regulator of sleep. Coffee and caffeine temporarily block the effect of adenosine, prolong sleep latency, and reduce total sleep time and quality. Humans are also influenced by aspects of social time, such as the hours when other people are awake, the hours when work is required, the time on the clock, etc. Time zone standard times used to unify the timing of people in the same area correspond only approximately in the natural rising and setting of the sun. In polyphasic sleep, an organism sleeps several times in a 24-hour cycle, whereas in a monophasic sleep, this occurs all at once. Under experimental conditions, humans tend to alternate more frequently between sleep and wakefulness, that is, exhibit more polyphasic sleep if they have nothing better to do. Given a 14-hour period of darkness in experimental conditions, humans tended towards bimodal sleep and two sleep periods concentrated at the beginning and at the end of the dark time. Bimodal sleep in humans was more common before the Industrial Revolution. Different characteristic sleep patterns, such as the familiarly so-called early bird and night owl, are called chronotypes. Genetics and gender have some influence on chronotype, but so do habits. Chronotype is also liable to change over the course of a person's lifetime. 7-year-olds are better disposed to wake up early in the morning than a 15-year-old. Chronotypes far outside the normal range are called circadian rhythm sleep disorders. The siesta habit has recently been associated with a 37% lower coronary mortality, possibly due to reduced cardiovascular stress mediated by daytime sleep. Short naps at midday and night evening exercise were found effective for improved sleep, cognitive tasks, and mental health in elderly people. monozygotic, identical but not dizygotic, fraternal twins tend to have similar sleep habits. Neurotransmitters, molecules whose production can be traced to specific genes, are one genetic influence on sleep, which can be analyzed. The circadian clock has its own set of genes. Genes which may influence sleep include ABCC9, DEC2, dopamine receptor D2, and variants here AX8 and VRK2. Quality of sleep may be evaluated from an objective and a subjective point of view. Objective sleep quality refers to how difficult it is for a person to fall asleep and remain in sleeping state, and how many times they wake up during a single night. Poor sleep quality disrupts the cycle of transition between the different stages of sleep. Subjective quality, sleep quality in turn refers to a sense of being rested and regenerated after awaking from sleep. A study by Hay Harvey et al. In 2002 found that insomniacs were more demanding in the evaluations of sleep quality than individuals who had no sleep problems. Homeostatic sleep propensity, the need for sleep, as a function of the amount of time elapsed since the last adequate sleep episode, must be balanced against the circadian element for unsatisfactory sleep. Along with the corresponding messages from the circadian clock, this tells the body it needs to sleep. This timing is correct when the following two circadian markers occur after the middle of the sleep episode and before awakening: maximum concentration of the hormone melatonin and minimum core body temperature. Human sleep needs vary by age and amongst individuals. Sleep is considered to be adequate when there is no daytime sleepiness or dysfunction. Moreover, self-reported sleep duration is only moderately correlated with actual sleep time as measured by actigraphy, and those affected with a sleep state misperception may typically report having slept only 4 hours despite having slept a full 8 hours. Researchers have found that sleeping 6 to 7 hours each night correlates with longevity and cardiac health in humans, though many underlying factors may be involved in the causality behind this relationship. Sleep difficulties are furthermore associated with psychiatric disorders such as depression, alcoholism, and bipolar disorder. Up to 90% of adults with depression are found to have sleep difficulties. Dysregulation detected by EEG includes disturbances in sleep continuity, decreased delta sleep, and altered REM patterns regard to latency, distribution across the night, and density of eye movements. By the time infants reach the age of 2, the brain size has reached 90% of the adult size brain. A majority of this brain growth has occurred during the period of life at the highest rate of sleep. The hours that children spend sleep influence their ability to perform on cognitive tasks. Children who sleep through the night and have a few night waking episodes have higher cognitive attainments and easier temperaments than other children. Sleep also influences language development. There is also a relationship between infants' vocabulary and sleeping. Infants who sleep longer at night at 12 months have better vocabularies at 26 months. The human organism physically restores itself during sleep, healing itself and removing metabolic waste that build up during periods of activity. This restoration takes place mostly during slow wave sleep, during which body temperature, heart rate, and brain oxygen consumption decrease. The brain especially requires sleep for restoration, whereas in the rest of the body, these process can take place during prescient waking. In both cases, the reduced rate of metabolism enables countervailing restorative process, while awake, metabolism generates reactive oxygen species which are damaging to cells. During sleep, metabolic state rates decrease, and reactive oxygen species generation is reduced, allowing restorative process to take over. The sleeping brain has been shown to remove metabolic waste products at a faster rate than during an awake state. It is further theorized that sleep helps facilitate the synthesis of molecules that help repair and protect the brain from these harmful elements generated during waking. Anabolic hormones, such as growth hormones, are secreted preferentially during sleep. The concentration of the sugar compound glycogen in the brain increases during sleep and is depleted through metabolism during wakefulness. Studies suggest that sleep deprivation may impair the body's ability to heal wounds. It has been shown that sleep deprivation affects the immune system in rats. It is now possible to state that sleep loss impairs immune function and immune challenge alters sleep. And it has been suggested that sleep increases while white blood cell counts. A 2014 study found that depriving mice of sleep increased cancer growth and dampened the immune system's ability to control cancers. The effect of sleep duration on somatic growth is not completely known. One study recorded growth, height, and weight as correlated to parent reported time in bed in 305 children over a period of 9 years, age 1 to 10. It has found that the variation of sleep duration among children does not seem to have an effect on growth. It is well established that slow wave sleep affects growth hormones in adult men. During 8 hours sleep, Van Cotter, Leprold, and Platt found that the men with a high percentage of slow wave sleep, SWS, average 24%, also had high growth hormone secretion, while subjects with a low percentage of SWS, slow wave sleep, average 9%, had low growth hormone secretion. It has been widely accepted that sleep must support the formation of long-term memory and generally increasing previous learning and experiences recalls. However, its benefit seems to depend on the phase of sleep and the type of memory. For example, declarative and procedural memory recall tasks applied over early and late nocturnal sleep, as well as wakefulness control conditions have been shown that declarative memory improves more during early sleep, dominated by SWS, while procedural memory during late sleep, dominated by REM sleep, does so. During sleep, especially REM sleep, humans tend to experience dreams. These are elusive and mostly unpredictable first-person experiences which seem logical and realistic to the dreamer while they are in progress, despite the frequently bizarre, irrational, and surreal qualities that became apparent when assessed after waking. Dreams often seamlessly incorporate concepts, situations, people, and objects within a person's mind that would not normally go together. They can include apparent sensations of all types, especially vision and movement. Dreams tend to rapidly fade from memory after waking. Insomnia is a general term for difficulty falling asleep and or staying asleep. Insomnia is the most common sleep problem, with many adults reporting occasional insomnia, and 10 to 15% reporting a chronic condition. Insomnia can have many different causes, including psychological stress, a poor sleep environment, or an inconsistent sleep schedule, or excessive mental or physical stimulation in the hours before bedtime. Insomnia is often treated through behavioral changes like keeping a regular sleep schedule, avoiding stimulating or stressful activities before bedtime, and cutting down on stimulants such as caffeine. The sleep environment may be improved by installing heavy drapes to shut off all sunlight and keeping computers, televisions, and work materials out of the sleeping area. A 2010 review of published scientific research suggested that exercise generally improves sleep for most people, not strenuous exercise, light exercises. Help sleep disorders such as insomnia. The optimum time to exercise may be 4 to 8 hours before bedtime. Though exercise at any time of day is beneficial, with the exception of heavy exercise taken shortly before bedtime, which may disturb the sleep. Moreover, there is insufficient evidence to draw detailed conclusions about the relationship between exercise and sleep. Sleeping medications such as Ambien and Lunesta are an increasingly popular treatment for insomnia, although these non-benzodiazepine medications are generally believed to be better and safer than earlier generations of sedatives. They have still generated some controversy and discussion regarding side effects. White noise appears to be a promising treatment for insomnia. Obstructive sleep apnea is a condition in which major pauses in breathing occur during sleep, disrupting the normal progression of sleep and often causing other more severe health problems. Apnea occurs when the muscles around the patient's airway relax during sleep, causing the airway to collapse and block the intake of oxygen. Obstructive sleep apnea is more common than central sleep apnea. As oxygen levels in the blood drop, the patient then comes out of deep sleep in order to resume breathing. When several of these episodes occur for our sleep apnea rises to a level of seriousness that may require treatment. Diagnosing sleep apnea usually requires a professional sleep study performed in a sleep clinic. because the episodes of wakefulness caused by the disorder are extremely brief and patients usually do not remember experiencing them. Instead, many patients simply feel tired after getting several hours of sleep and have no idea why. Major risk factors for sleep apnea include chronic fatigue, old age, obesity, and snoring. People over age 60 with prolonged sleep, 8 to 10 hours or more, average sleep duration of 7 to 8 hours in the elderly, have a 33% increased risk of all-cause mortality and 43% increased risk of cardiovascular diseases. While those with a short sleep, less than 7 hours, have a 6% increased risk of all-cause mortality. Sleep disorders, including sleep apnea, insomnia, or periodic eye movements, occur more commonly in the elderly, each possibly impacting sleep quality and duration. A 2017 review indicated that older adults do not need less sleep, but rather have an impaired ability to obtain their sleep needs and may be able to deal with sleepiness better than younger adults. Various practices are recommended to mitigate sleep disturbances in the elderly, as having a light bedtime snack, avoidance of caffeine, daytime naps, excessive evening stimulation and tobacco products, and using regular bedtime and wake schedules. Okay, sleep disorders include narcolepsy, periodic limb movement disorder, PLMD, and restless leg syndrome, RLS, upper airway resistance syndrome, UARS, and the circadian rhythm sleep disorders, fatal familial insomnia, FFI, an extremely rare genetic disease with no known treatment or cure, is characterized by increasing insomnia as one of its symptoms. Ultimately, sufferers of the disease stop sleeping entirely before dying of the disease. Somnambulism, also known as sleepwalking, is a sleeping disorder, especially among children. Low quality sleep has been linked with the health conditions like cardiovascular diseases, obesity, and mental illness. While poor sleep is common among those with cardiovascular diseases, some research indicates that poor sleep can be a contributing cause. Short sleep duration of less than 7 hours is correlated with coronary heart disease and increased risk of death from coronary heart disease. Sleep duration greater than 9 hours is also correlated with coronary heart disease as well as stroke and cardiovascular events. In both children and adults, sleep duration, short sleep duration is associated with an increased risk of obesity, with various studies reporting an increased risk of 45 to 55%. Other aspects of sleep health have been associated with obesity, including daytime napping. Sleep power napping is good. Sleep timing, the variability of sleep timing and low sleep efficiency. However, sleep duration is the most studied for its impact on obesity. Sleep problems have been frequently viewed as a symptom of mental illness rather than a causative factor. However, a growing body of evidence suggests that they are both a cause and a symptom of mental illness. Insomnia is a significant predictor of major depressive disorder. A meta-analysis of 170,000 people showed that insomnia at the beginning of the study period indicated a more than the twofold increased risk for two major depressive disorders. Some studies have also indicated correlation between insomnia and anxiety. Post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and suicide. Sleep disorders can increase the risk of psychosis and worsen the severity of psychotic episodes. Drugs which induce sleep, known as hypnotics, include benzodiazepines, although these interfere with REM, rapid eye movement sleep. Non-benzodiazepine hypnotics, such as esopiclone, lunesta, zalapalone, sonata, zolpidem, Ambien, antihistamines such as diphenhydramine, Benadryl, and doxylamine, alcohol, ethanol, despite its rebound effect later in the night and interference with the REM, rapid eye movement sleep. Barbiturates, which have the same problem, melatonin, a component of the circadian clock, and released naturally at night by the pineal gland, and cannabis, which may also interfere with REM. Stimulants which inhibit sleep include caffeine and adenosine antagonist, amphetamine, MDMA, empathogens, and related drugs, cocaine, which can alter the circadian rhythm, and methylphenidate, which acts similarly, and other Analgesic drugs are like modafinil and aramodafinil with a poorly understood mechanism. Dietary and nutritional choices may affect sleep duration and quality. One 2016 review indicated that a high carbohydrate diet promoted a shorter onset of sleep, the longer duration of sleep than a high fat diet. A 2012 investigation suggested that mixed micronutrients and macronutrients are needed to promote quality sleep. A varied diet containing fresh fruits and vegetables, low saturated fat, and whole grains may be optimal for individuals seeking to improve sleep quality. High quality clinical trials and long term dietary practices are needed to better define the influence of diet on sleep quality. If you have ever spent a night tossing and turning, you already know how you will feel the next day tired, cranky, and out of sorts. But missing out on the recommended 7 to 9 hours of shut-eye nightly does more than make you feel groggy and grumpy. The long-term effects of sleep deprivation are real. It drains your mental ability and puts your physical health at real risk. Science has linked poor slumber with a number of health problems from weight gain to a weakened immune system. Prime effects of sleep deprivation are memory issues, mood changes, weakened immunity, risk for diabetes. The body needs sleep just as it needs air and food to function at its best. During sleep, your body heals itself and restores its chemical balance. Your brain forges new thought connections and helps memory retention. Without enough sleep, your brain and body systems won't function normally. It can also dramatically lower your quality of life. A review of studies in 2010 found that sleeping too little at night increases the risk of early death. Noticeable signs of sleep deprivation include excessive sleepiness, frequent yawning, irritability, daytime fatigue. Stimulants such as caffeine aren't enough to override your body's profound need for sleep. In fact, these can make sleep deprivation worse by making it harder to fall asleep at night. This in turn may lead to a cycle of nighttime insomnia followed by a daytime caffeine consumption to combat the tiredness caused by the last hours of shut eye. Behind the scenes, chronic sleep deprivation can interfere with your body's internal systems and cause more than just the initial signs and symptoms listed. Your central nervous system is the main information highway of your body. Sleep is necessary to keep it functioning properly, but chronic insomnia can disrupt how your body usually sends and processes information. During sleep, pathways form between nerve cells, neurons in your brain that help you remember how new information you learn. Sleep deprivation leaves your brain exhausted, so it cannot perform its duties as well. You may also find it more difficult to concentrate or learn new things. The signals your body sends may also be delayed, decreasing your coordination and increasing your risk of accidents, especially while you're driving. Sleep deprivation also negatively affects your mental abilities and emotional state. You may feel more impatient or prone to mood swings. It can also compromise decision making process and creativity. If sleep deprivation continues long enough, you could start having hallucinations, seeing or hearing things that aren't really there. The lack of sleep can also trigger mania in people who have bipolar mood disorder. Other psychological risks include impulsive behavior, anxiety, depression, paranoia, suicidal thoughts. You may also end up experiencing micro sleep during the day. During these episodes, you'll fall asleep for a few to several seconds without even realizing it. Micro sleep is out of your control and can be extremely dangerous if you're driving. It can also make you more prone to injury if you operate heavy machinery at work and have a micro sleep episode. While you sleep, your immune system produces protective infection fighting substances like antibodies and cytokines. It uses these substances to combat foreign invaders such as bacteria and viruses. Certain cytokines can help you to sleep, giving your immune system more efficiency to defend your body against illness. Sleep deprivation prevents your immune system from building up its forces. If you don't get enough sleep, your body may not be able to fend off invaders, and it may also take you longer to recover from illness. Long-term sleep deprivation also increases your risk for chronic conditions such as diabetes mellitus and heart disease. The relationship between sleep and the respiratory system goes both ways. A nighttime breathing disorder called obstructive sleep apnea (OSA) can interrupt your sleep and lower sleep quality. As you wake up throughout the night, this can cause sleep deprivation, which leaves you more vulnerable to respiratory infections like the common cold and flu. Sleep deprivation can also make existing respiratory diseases worse, such as chronic lung illness. Along with eating too much and not exercising. Sleep deprivation is another risk factor for becoming overweight and obese. Sleep affects the levels of two hormones, leptin and ghrelin, which control feelings of hunger and fullness. Leptin tells your brain that you have had enough to eat. Without enough sleep, your brain reduces leptin and raises ghrelin, which is an appetite stimulus. So you eat like a pig. The flux of these hormones could explain nighttime snacking or why someone may be overeat later in the night. The lack of sleep can also make you feel too tired to exercise. Over time, reduced physical activity can make you gain weight because you are not burning enough calories and not building muscle mass. Sleep deprivation also lowers the body's tolerance for glucose and is associated with insulin resistance. These disruptions can lead to diabetes mellitus and obesity. Sleep affects processes that keep your heart and blood vessels healthy, including those that affect your blood sugar, blood pressure, and inflammation levels. It also plays a vital role in your body's ability to heal and repair the blood vessels and heart. People who don't sleep enough are more likely to get cardiovascular diseases. One analysis linked insomnia to an increased risk of heart attack and stroke. Hormone production is dependent on your sleep. Testosterone, testro, testosterone production, you need at least 3 hours of uninterrupted sleep, which is about the time of your first REM episode. Waking up throughout the night could affect hormone production. This interruption can also affect growth hormone production, especially in children and adolescents. These hormones help the body build muscle mass and repair cells and tissues, in addition to other growth functions. The pituitary gland releases growth hormone throughout each day, but adequate sleep and exercise can help the release of this hormone. The most basic form of sleep deprivation treatment is getting an adequate amount of sleep, typically 7 hours, 9 hours each night. This is often easier said than done, especially if you have been deprived of previous shut-eye for several weeks or longer. After this point, you may need help from your doctor or a sleep specialist who, if needed, can diagnose and treat a possible sleeping disorder. Sleep disorders may make it difficult to get quality sleep at night. They may also increase your risk for the above effects of sleep deprivation on the body. The following are some of the most common types of sleep disorders: obstructive sleep apnea, narcolepsy, restlessness leg syndrome, insomnia, circadian rhythm disorders. To diagnose these conditions, your doctor may order a sleep study. This is traditionally conducted at a formal sleep center, but now there are options to measure your sleep quality at home too. If you are diagnosed with a sleep disorder, you may be given medication or a device to keep your airway open at night. In the case of obstructive sleep apnea, they help combat the disorder as you can get a better night's sleep on a regular basis. The best way to prevent sleep deprivation is to make sure you get adequate sleep. Follow the recommended guidelines for your age group, which is 7 to 9 hours for most adults ages 18 to 64. Other ways you can get back to track with a healthy sleep schedule include limiting daytime naps or avoiding them altogether, refraining from caffeine past noon or at least a few hours prior to bedtime, going to bed at the same time each night, waking up at the same time every morning, sticking to a bedtime schedule during weekends and holidays, spending an hour before bed doing relaxing activities such as reading, meditating, or taking a bath, avoiding heavy meals within a few hours before bedtime, refraining from using electronic devices right before bed, exercising regularly but not in the evening hours close to bedtime, reducing alcohol intake. If you continue to have problems sleeping at night and are fighting daytime fatigue, talk to your doctor. They can test for underlying health conditions that might be getting in the way of your sleep schedule. I'll conclude with my personal recommendations, also known as 20 commandments. Have light dinner. Finish up dinner before 7 p.m. since it takes a minimum of 2 hours for digestion. Do low intensity workouts, in particular yoga and deep breathing 3 hours before you retire to bed. Turn off all electronic gadgets 2 hours before bedtime. Have a glass of warm milk 1 hour before bedtime. Read some book you like. Listen to soft melodious music. Power naps after lunch for about half an hour is good. Siesta. Never go to bed on an empty stomach. No coffee, smoking, hard drinks 2 hours before bedtime. Close your eyes and rewind all the pleasant events of the day and in your life. Have a warm water bath 1 hour before bedtime. Curb usage of medications even to sleep. Sleep should be a natural process. I have seen students going without sleep the night before an important exam. Never do that. Rest adequately the night before an important event, and they are bound to come out with flying colors. Prepare well in advance. Manage your time well. This will enable your mind to think clearly. Jet lags are very common when you fly from one time zone to another, especially from east to west and vice versa. Tune your circadian clock in advance. Create a nice ambience in a bedroom and certainly it will induce proper sleep. Use the bedroom as a bedroom. No TV, no work materials, etc. Dim the lights well before bedtime. Maintain a sleep schedule and stick to it as much as possible. Rhythm. In India, companies keep changing the shift timings on a weekly basis. Instead, do it on a monthly basis such that the circadian rhythm is not upset. Do whatever you can to reduce the noise level in your bedroom. If you can afford sound insulation is a good option like in auditoriums. Focus your mind on anything in particular. Maybe look at a 3D hologram or photo. Count the number of sheep in the picture. Count the number of stars in the sky. Count numbers backwards, etc. Focus your mind basically. Free your mind of unwanted tension in some way or other, like meditation. Okay. I know it is easy to preach but tough to practice. Take one step at a time. And like the tortoise will attain what you aspire for. Debates, discussion on open-ended topics like this can go on forever. Anyhow, let me pull the plug here. We'll meet again real soon with another interesting topic. Some of the statements used expressed are solely mine, based on limited knowledge gained over 6 decades of widespread experience. Always watch these videos with closed captions, subtitles for absolute 100% comprehension as per my sincere recommendation zillion times so far. I know I rushed through to complete the presentation in 20 minutes, which is a norm that I had set myself to retain the viewer's attention. But I know pretty well that I'm exceeding the time limit. Nowadays, I take double the time or sometimes even 3 times that since I make honest attempts to cover the selected topic more elaborately, referring a lot of materials, especially Wikipedia quite extensively, and articles and books published recently. Besides, of course, I sprinkle my own salt and pepper and season it with my personal experiences so far in my life and also intuition. Stay at home as much as possible to maintain social distancing attributed to pandemic novel COVID-19 and prolong your lifespan. Lead a healthy life. Government can put a stop to natural unnatural events, may drive and cyber events like pandemics, which may lead to apocalypse and extinction of all sentient species on Earth for no fault of theirs. Rest in peace and harmony.